Welcome to another episode of Couch Catechism. My name is Michael Obeid, your host from Veracis Media. Welcome to another show. I have got Monica Doumit tonight. Welcome, Monica. How are you?
Thank you so much. I'm wonderful.
Now, Monica, I got you on the show. You are I know you don't want to admit this, okay, because of the humility of being humble and everything, but you write for the Catholic Weekly. And you're in, you do a lot for the church. Do you mind just giving us a bit of an introduction, telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure thing. Well, my current role is that I'm the Director of Public Affairs and Engagement for the Archdiocese of Sydney. It's a big, long title, and what it really just means is that I'm a bit of a policy advisor to Archbishop Fisher. My job is really to look at what's happening in politics, in the media, in the culture, in the courts, and see what it is that the church needs to be responding to, aware of, and things like that. It means that for the most part, I'm fighting the culture wars day in and day out.
And you've been busy in recent times, eh?
I've been very, very busy, yeah. I was a lawyer by trade and training, so my first 10 years of professional life, I worked as a lawyer, mainly in Sydney, and then a little stint in London. And then I was working over in London, so it was 2013, and I got an email from the Archdiocese, somebody within the Archdiocese, and it said, "Dear Monica, we think that you should come back to Sydney and work in communications. Here is a list of your objections, and here is a list of our response to your objections."
Wow. So they really wanted you on board.
They were pretty good. And so I came back to Sydney and started working for the Archdiocese in communications.
And was it hard leaving London? Like, did you enjoy it over there?
I didn't enjoy London, actually. No, so it was nice to come back.
Was it the weather or the culture or a bit of both?
It's quite solitary, I found it. Particularly where I was working. I was a financial services, sort of mergers and acquisitions lawyer.
Yep.
And so you're in the part of town where everybody's just there to work.
Okay.
You go into the supermarkets, they're all meals for one, and all of those types of things, because it's not built for family life, for a lot of deep friendships. So yeah, it was a great experience, but I was happy to come home. It was difficult to leave the law and come in to work for the church, but that was 7 years ago now, and no regrets.
But your passion is in law, I'm guessing, and with your faith as well. So have you found a way to harmonise both? Because I'm pretty sure that you use a lot of your experience and your expertise in law to help you with your current role? Yeah,
absolutely. Well, most of what I'm doing is looking at laws, looking at policy documents and things like that. And then in terms of writing, I really learnt to write by being a lawyer, because lawyers have a precision with language. You have to be very, very careful about what you say. Everything you write is intentional as a lawyer, and that's really helpful when you're coming in to do a role like mine.
And you've written for the Catholic Weekly now for how long?
So I was writing for the Catholic Weekly when I was living over in London. So we're going on 8 years now.
And now freelance, were you getting paid for it, or was it just an act of charity, an act of love for the church?
It was an act of charity.
Well done. So, that's awesome.
So I was writing from over there and doing some other writing on for various things with the Archdiocese.
And was it just anything in general, or were there certain topics of interest that you really liked that you wanted to speak about?
They gave me a long leash and just said, write about what you want to write about. I think people write best and do best when they're following their natural desires anyway and their natural interests.
And what do you find great about working for the Archdiocese? What do you really enjoy about it? The challenges.
I love the challenges. I'm going to sound like I'm blowing smoke here, but I love the priests. I love the priests of Sydney. Being able to work with them, being able to support them in what they do is just such a great reward. And there's such a great support in my role. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the challenges. But I don't think, 2 days go past without getting a text from one of the Sydney priests just going, hey, offering mass for you today, or, just checking in to see if you're okay, or anything like that. So they're really, really good to me.
Awesome.
I love working with them. I love working with Archbishop Fisher. So I would do my current role for free.
Awesome. But it's good to be paid anyway.
It's good to be paid. It's good to be paid.
Now, one of the reasons, not one of the reasons, but why we brought you on the show was because you're in the know when it comes to a lot of the things that are happening, not only just on the Catholic scene, but within Australia as well, with regards to policies, laws, things that are happening. And I've read a couple of your articles, and it looks as though a lot of the states, a lot of the policies that are going around by some of the premiers, it's like they're directing their attack specifically against the church. I don't know whether the devil has just decided just to like take control and just, but this is a fight that we've always had. Can you bring us up to speed on just some of the policies that are getting brought in, things that maybe our viewers should be aware of?
Sure thing. Goodness, where to start?
Should we go state by state?
We can either go state by state or topic by topic.
So okay. How do you want to start? Where do you want to go?
Well, look, maybe we start in Victoria because Victoria is everyone's favourite beating up ground, right? And Premier Andrews.
Yeah.
But you look at what's happened in Victoria in recent times. We go back to 2008, and they were the first ones to pass the abortion decriminalisation, and at that time they were the most extreme abortion laws I think in the world. Wow. Right, and that's saying something.
Yeah. And that's before these New South Wales ones got.
So that was 2008. Yeah. And New South Wales was sort of 2019.
Yeah.
So so Victoria sort of seems to be at the forefront of these types of challenges. Most recently, we've had the change in conversion therapy laws, and
what's going on with that?
So when people talk about conversion therapy, when they talk about it publicly, they sort of say, oh, well, that's where they give people electroshock therapy or aversion therapy when they present as same-sex attracted, right? Mm-hmm. And some churches did that, decades ago. It's not a practice that occurs in Australia at the moment. But in Victoria, they talk about conversion as either trying to change or to suppress somebody's sexual orientation or gender identity.
Okay.
And so what that means is it's not necessarily about saying to somebody, okay, you're same-sex attracted and we're going to try and force you to be opposite-sex attracted. It's like, well, you're same-sex attracted. Maybe we're going to talk to you about chastity. Maybe we're going to invite you to courage and to let you live in accordance with your faith and to assist you in doing that. Mm-hmm. Because the idea of any type of suppression of sexual desire, sexual activity is now against the law.
Just in Victoria or?
Just in Victoria. So this is the conversion therapy laws are so broad.
And this was a bill that was passed back in 08, was
it? No,
this is something recent now.
This was in the last few weeks.
In the last few weeks. Okay. Mm. So what's the specific, you don't have to name the bill, but so what's the gist of what the bill's about?
So what the bill says is that it is against the law for a person to engage in a practice, including a prayer-based practice.
Wow.
That has as its aim either changing or suppressing somebody's sexual orientation or gender identity. And they've defined sexual orientation and gender identity so broad to even include sexual attraction, right?
Okay.
So that's legal language. What it means in practice is you can't tell somebody or you can't assist somebody, whether it's through spiritual counselling or prayer or psychological assistance or any other mechanism like that, you can't assist them in suppressing any type of sexual desire.
Yeah. Or not even so much suppressing it, but just living out their chastity or living out their...
Living chastely. And so we're not even talking about the LGBTI community.
Yeah.
If you as a married man went to your priest and said, I'm really tempted to cheat on my wife. Can you help me? Technically under the law, the priest isn't allowed to counsel you to not cheat on your wife.
What about, let's say, for example, a person who has an addiction to pornography and wants to go see the priest for that reason? Would that be along the same lines or?
It's a hard one to say. It depends on whether or not that gets counted as sexual activity. Or that as a result of that, he's drawn to, for example, to go out and see prostitutes. He's addicted to going and seeing prostitutes. Absolutely.
So that would be illegal.
That would be illegal. Dare I say, even teaching celibacy in the seminary is now at risk.
Wow. In Victoria.
In Victoria, because you're teaching somebody and giving them the tools to... and I know suppress is a bad word, but is not the right word, but that's the word that they're using.
That's the word that they're using.
Yeah, so and if you're encouraging somebody to live celibacy and giving them the tools to do that, against the law.
Wow.
Can I get even a little bit more controversial with you? Even somebody...
Because I'm going to get more controversial with you after you say this, because I've got a question for you after this. Yeah,
okay. I'm going to preempt it.
Yeah.
Even if someone said, I've got a sexual attraction to children, I need some help.
Wow.
Technically, under the law, even that, you can't offer them psychological help, spiritual help, nothing.
But is this only within the realms of a religious institution or anyone?
It's any institution. So psychologists are banned as well. Yep.
So doctors. A psychologist in Victoria, so if a person has got pedophilic tendencies, he's not allowed to go and see a psychologist and say, I would like treatment.
Yeah.
Okay, do you know the reasons why that bill got passed? Or was it purely an attack on the church? They said, you know what, we want to attack the church because we know what they've done in the past, or because we know that what their teachings on sexuality are, and so we're just going to come up with this bill that's just going to envelop this entire array of different situations, and we don't care who's going to fall within the under the gunfire. We're just going to do it anyway. Yeah,
absolutely. And because the thing is that it's there are only consequences for you if you're prosecuted, okay. Right? And you're going to love this. Yeah. So under the law, you don't even have to wait for somebody to complain. The Victorian Human Rights Commission, or whatever they're called down there, have the power to investigate an institution that they think might be engaging in this type of practice. So they can voluntarily go and investigate an institution that they think is engaging in conversion practices and
so
force
they don't
them
need
to produce
precedents.
They don't need somebody complaining. They just need to say,
But where do they get these whims from, or these? Where do they get these inclinations to go out and investigate? Because wouldn't there need to be some sort of a precedent for them to be able to say, okay, we are investigating the Catholic Archdiocese of Melbourne because there was a case whereby somebody came to us and complained.
No, they can. To be honest, they could just look at the catechism and go, well, the Catholic Church, look at the paragraph in the catechism that talks about, it talks about same-sex attraction as being intrinsically disordered. Well, that's, that type of statement is against the law. So you could, in theory, have the situation where the Victorian Human Rights Commission are asking priests to hand over copies of homilies and things like that.
Really?
And where do you think, if the Human Rights Commission have the power to, of its own volition, investigate an institution, and we're in Victoria, who do you think they're coming after, right?
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah, but you know what though? What about all the other churches that are going to be in the gunfire, in the firing line as well, like with the Orthodox and the Anglicans and everyone else who holds to the same traditional values that we do?
Everyone's in the firing line.
Yeah.
And it's great. Even the Presbyterians, the Moderator General of the Presbyterians is a guy named Peter Barnes. Wonderful, wonderful man.
Yep.
He just came out and said, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. We're going to keep preaching Christ. We're going to keep preaching the gospel.
And whatever happens, happens?
Whatever happens, happens.
Okay.
And, we might talk about this a bit later, but I think that the time has come where really we just need to do that.
Yeah.
So whatever it is, we just need to stand up.
Okay. So keep going.
I know I was going to say, do you want to move on from Victoria now? We could say
no, let's keep talking about Victoria, because I really my heart goes out to Victoria, because as a state, I really love. I love Victoria and I love Melbourne. I used to speak about it all the time. My wife and I have been there so many times, but I just find it to be such a godless place. And I was speaking to you about that before. That I just find that the God is definitely he has removed his blessing from Victoria. Anyway, we can talk about that more after. What about the church in Victoria? Was there any fight? Did they try to fight it at all? What happened?
Yeah, well, Archbishop Comensoli took out a full-page ad in the newspaper.
Okay.
They did everything that they could.
Okay,
but,
so they tried.
Yeah, but if you he was saying, I think, to the Catholic Weekly, shameless plug for the paper, but he was saying he was met with a wall of silence. That nobody
responded, nobody said anything.
Responded, nobody would consult with them.
Yep.
That was it. So the church was just completely shut out.
Wow. And with regards to the bill itself, aren't there stages in which the bill gets proposed, it goes through, and then there's a vote, and then it gets passed? What was the process? How long did it take? Was there any pushback then?
So
it seemed like it just went under the radar, and bang, 1 minute Because like we've got institutions within, like in Sydney, for example, like Courage. And just so that people are aware, like, could you just tell people what Courage is about in Sydney?
Yeah, sure. So Courage is a ministry of the church.
Yep.
For people who are struggling with same-sex attraction.
Yep.
And so you meet with a priest and other people with the same struggle.
Yep.
And it's, you know, community, it's support, and it's really there to encourage you to live chastity.
Yep.
And look, all of us are called to chastity. It's not just...
It's not just people who are same-sex attraction.
Yeah,
absolutely.
All of us are called to chastity, but it's, so what it's saying is that you can be a person with same-sex attraction and be a person of faith and live those two things together and side by side, and actually, you know, you can become a great saint.
That's right.
Through
and people feel a sense of freedom, and because I've seen a documentary called Desire of the Everlasting Hills. That speaks about 3 people that go through similar types of experiences or not conversion therapy, but like they recognize and they understand the church's teachings and they feel like they found freedom in that. This is now illegal in Victoria.
Yeah, and so
what's happening to Courage in Victoria? They have to shut shop?
Well, Courage is illegal. I don't know whether or not they'll shut shop, but it's Courage would be illegal.
But does it operate in Victoria though? Or under that title? Well, we shouldn't say anything because we don't want anyone to...
be honest, I don't think we should say anything.
Okay, done.
But the thing is that people should have a right.
Yeah,
right? If you're an adult and you're a person of faith, you should have a right to seek the help to live in accordance with your faith. What this law in Victoria says is it says that your religious identity must always be a lower priority than your sexual identity. And that's not true. Wow. There are many people of faith who are same-sex attracted, but who cherish their religious freedom as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? This isn't an either or.
Yeah.
But the Victorian government sort of has made you choose. But the other thing I should say, in the process of this becoming law, it wasn't opposed by the Liberal government. Okay. So the only people who opposed it, there were a handful of like crossbenchers, but for the most part, it just went through with the support of the Liberal government. There was no opposition to this, and that's the really scary thing, because it's a really dangerous bill.
Well, and that just goes to show you the mindset and the beliefs of a lot of those ministers that played a role or they played a hand in passing this bill, because it goes to show that some of them are probably Catholic anyway. But the way that they feel probably with regards to certain sexual topics, like within Victoria, they're like, you know what, maybe it's right. Maybe the church is suppressing people's sexuality and identity, and maybe we need to put a stop to it because of whatever's happened in the past. But I guess it's just a bunch of misinformation. Maybe.
There's also the bit of, it's going to go through, and so why should I fight and make myself unpopular publicly if I'm just going to get hammered and then it'll be used against me later. Like, so.
But I'm seeing a bit of an implication with this as well, because I'm thinking about, like, what if, like for example, on the what about on the passages within St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, for example? What about like certain passages within the Bible that speak about sexuality, speak about, and then the priest decides to go and give a homily, for example, on those passages, and speaks about, for example, you know, sexual ethics. Now that would be considered illegal.
Potentially, yeah.
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 So
they're saying, it won't be enforced for stuff like that.
Okay.
But
you never know. But it's given them grounds to. Why pass the bill otherwise?
Exactly. And it's Victoria.
And it's Victoria, yeah.
Sorry, our Victorian friends, we love you. So many good, wonderful Catholics down in Victoria.
Yeah, the few of you that are there. The remnant. Okay, let's move on to another state then. What's going on you want to talk about South Australia? And then we'll move on to...
Yeah, we'll do South Australia.
Okay.
So
what's going on in South Australia?
So South Australia's just passed their abortion bill.
Yep.
There was a bit of a fight to that. They put on quite a good fight. I think they said they had something like 6,000 at the March for Life. Or
were they inspired by by the fight that we put up?
Well, I hope so. I hope so. But it was really good to see a good fight was put up.
Yep.
Down there, but
and what was the law like? Before, and what did they want to change it to with the abortion laws?
So this was another one of that there were limits on later term abortions.
Yep. And the number of doctors, those types of things, and so those restrictions have been lifted. Okay.
The reasons for late term abortions and things like that, and also that the need for an in-person consultation,
Okay.
which I think has now been lifted as well.
Okay. And what about all those other like really bad things, like for example, gender selective abortions and full late term abortions and
so late term abortions are in. I think that there was something. Sorry, and I'd have to go back and check.
Wow.
But I think that there was something in there at least to say that you're not allowed to abort on the grounds of gender.
Okay.
But then again, if you can abort for any reason, having a prohibition on you can't for gender.
Okay.
You know, you just don't say gender's the reason. Right?
Okay. Yeah, that's right.
And look, gender's a social construct apparently anyway, so you can't.
That's true.
It's meaningless. Gender's
exactly.
meaningless anyway.
Wow.
But so the two big fights for them, one will be later in the year. You've got someone putting up a private member's bill for euthanasia.
Yep.
But then the interesting one is what they're planning to do with the anti-discrimination laws.
Okay.
So for those who don't know how religious freedom is recognised in Australia,
Yep.
so while international human rights sort of says you have the right to religious freedom, the way that our laws do it is most laws in Australia say you're not allowed to discriminate against somebody on the basis of race, sex, age, disability, all of these things. But there are certain exemptions for religious institutions.
Yep.
So, for example, the reason that we can have a male-only priesthood in the church is, you know, the Sex Discrimination Act says you can't discriminate on somebody on the basis of sex. But then it says, but religious institutions are allowed to,
Are exempt. Yep.
when they're picking their ministers. So the reason that a Catholic school is allowed to require that the staff are Catholic,
Yep.
or at least prefer Catholic staff,
Yeah.
is because there's an exemption. It says you're not allowed to discriminate on the basis of religion,
Yep.
except that in these circumstances, religious institutions
Because for our
can.
viewers who don't know, like, because to their ears, they probably see discrimination as a bad thing, but discriminating, depending upon how you apply it and where you apply it, it's sometimes good to discriminate. So, for example, in a Catholic school where you're getting, hopefully the teachers are teaching Catholic ethics or Catholic or the Catholic faith, it's important to have teachers who are of a Catholic ethos, or at least they're going to uphold the Catholic ethos. And then, therefore, like within contracts, it's okay for churches to be able to, or for the religious institutions to be able to discriminate in that way. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you kind of expect it, right?
Yes.
You expect that religious schools should be able to hire people of their own faith. You know, technically you're not allowed to discriminate on the basis of political opinion either, but if you're a political party, you can. Which means that, you know, I have no problem that I'll never get a job working for the Greens because they're not going to want to hire me.
Yeah.
And that's fine. That's absolutely fine.
You don't want to work for the Greens?
I don't want to work for the Greens,
yeah,
right?
I don't want to work for the Greens either.
But you're right, because when people hear discrimination, then then it has a negative connotation.
That's
so
right.
in our anti-discrimination laws, if the only way that our religious freedom is protected is to say you're not allowed to discriminate except the churches get a free pass here, all of a sudden it feels like the churches are getting special treatment.
Okay.
And they're allowed to discriminate in circumstances where others aren't allowed to. Instead of saying, no, religious freedom is a right. You have the right to build schools and hospitals and you know, engage in worship and all of those things. But that's the way our laws are, and they have been run for a long time.
Yep.
So in South Australia, under the Anti-Discrimination Act, it says, you know, you're not allowed to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, those types of things, except that religious organisations can. Now the proposed law in South Australia is to remove those exemptions.
Okay.
So
and this is just a proposal right now?
This is just a proposal. So there was a public consultation.
Yep.
But the government seems pretty adamant that they're going to do it. They're going to push it through.
So what's the implication then?
So let me give you an example. Like one of the things that they say is schools aren't allowed to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity.
Yep.
For staff or for students, right? And a lot of people say, you know, even people within the church and well-meaning people in the church say, oh, well, that's okay because we don't want to discriminate against students on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. We would never do that anyway, so fine, you can remove that. But schools do discriminate, right? By telling the boys they have to wear a boys' uniform and the girls they have to wear a girls' uniform.
That's a form of discrimination.
That's a form of discrimination. Separating for bathrooms, sporting teams, camping, all of those things. even sex ed, right? If you remove the exemption for religious schools, then what's to stop a kid coming in and saying, well, or not necessarily a kid, dare I say, some activist parents coming in and saying, well, you're only teaching heterosexual sexuality in the classroom. In order to, not discriminate, my child has a right to have all forms of sexual activity presented to them. Otherwise, that's discrimination. You've got a kid who wants to transition their gender in a school. Suggesting to them that maybe they'd be more comfortable at a different school where they could, potentially even transition, but not have it happen in front of their classmates, and then force parents to have that conversation with their children about, my friend Johnny has just become Jane. Can boys become girls, Mum? Maybe you don't want your 7-year-old asking those questions, right? So
you even gave an example about a situation in which a classroom teacher transitions.
Yeah, absolutely. So
like in term 1, it's a male. And then come term 2 after. What would the example?
Exactly right. So say you've got a male teacher in there, and then halfway through he's teaching a Year 2 class, and then he says, "Oh, I'm going to start hormonal treatment to become a woman. I'm going to start growing my hair, and I'm going to want the kids to start, calling me, Miss." For whatever the choices of that individual, you're taking the decision out of the hands of the parents in terms of when they get to have those conversations with their children, because all of a sudden you're forcing the hands of the parents to have a conversation about gender identity with kids, right? So,
but the implication is that the bill will allow that person to be supported within that school, and it would be considered illegal for them, so for the school to discriminate against them and get them to maybe find another school that would be more suitable, that would cater towards their understanding of their own sexuality.
Exactly right. Or even going to a school in their different gender. But then at least you're not forcing the kids to have to go through
and to make sense of it all.
It's not really related, but there was something in the paper last week about preschool that's the book of the month is like Johnny is a mermaid or something like that. And it's talking about a boy who transitions into a girl, and they're going to read it every day. To the 3-year-olds, or another one like the title was something like Billy likes pink, and it's sort of that it's okay if boys like pink. Kids by that age are only just learning their colours. They don't need to be learning about gendered notions of colour, and it's just ridiculous. Like you're removing the innocence of children.
Absolutely. It reminds me of the Safe Schools program coming back again. Like it's like I know that they implemented the Safe Schools program in Victoria. That was never implemented in New South Wales, but
no, certain schools did do it.
They did do it, didn't they?
Yeah, and actually the list of schools was pulled off the Department of Education website, so you weren't able to see which schools were teaching it.
But isn't that an imposition against the freedom that parents should have and the rights that parents should have to know what's being taught to their children within their schools?
Absolutely. This is the thing. These things seem to exist in the dark and intentionally be taken away from parents.
Wow.
And I think... I think we get ourselves into some dangerous territory where you start saying that you want to teach kids matters about sexuality, and it's hidden from the parents, right? The only way to protect kids, particularly against those who might want to abuse them, is to encourage all conversations like that to be had with the full involvement of the parents, so that children know. You never have those types of conversations where your parents don't know and your parents can't be told, because that's where,
especially at such a young age. And there's also a bill that's kind of related to that one, or maybe it's the same one, where the government is trying, or the bill by Daniel Andrews again, is trying to allow certain information or certain education to be taught within schools, and for parents to be left in the dark about that kind of education. Because I remember reading one of your articles, and there was either a bill or something that was being proposed whereby whatever's being taught within the classroom, okay, it can be done without the parents' consent.
Oh, okay. So we're flicking to New South Wales now. We'll leave South Australia.
Okay, yeah. Yep. So it's related then. So this is what's happening now in New South Wales.
A little bit. So what's happened is Mark Latham, who you always can trust to swing a bit of a bat and pick a fight.
Good on him.
So he wants to make changes. He's proposed a bill to make changes to the Education Act, and that does basically two things. Yep. What it does is it talks about matters of parental primacy.
Yep.
So if there's anything really that deals with, the morals that your kids are being taught, religion, values, ideologies, politics, all of those things, these are this is what he defines as matters of parental primacy, which mean the school needs to let the parents know up front, in advance, there are going to be classes that touch on these issues.
Yep.
This is what's going to be taught, and then give them the right to remove their child if they don't want their child taught that, right?
Okay.
So it's about transparency with parents, accountability, and then giving them the choice about when and how their children learn about these matters. So that's the first aspect of it. And the second aspect is no gender fluidity to be taught in schools.
Okay.
That the idea that gender is fluid, it's a social construct, whatever it is, shouldn't be taught in primary school, it shouldn't be taught in high school.
Yep.
Because that's not the place for ideas like that.
Yep.
It's getting a lot of opposition.
Yep.
It's funny, right? Like, it's just, I don't know how people can argue argue against transparency to parents when it comes to the education of their children, but there are so many people fighting against it.
Okay. And so keep going. So
there's been a public consultation process.
Yep.
Submissions have gone in. A lot of organisations have made submissions. Then it'll go to the committee stage and see what happens with it. I'm not confident that it'll go anywhere. Mark Latham's, One Nation. You need the appetite of the government to let it go through. And I wish they had the political appetite and political will. I'm just not sure.
So if this law gets passed, that means that schools will be able to hide topics or certain bits of information from parents, and they can pretty much just remove them from having any kind of role to play in what gets taught to their children within schools?
No, not necessarily. So this is about is positively placing the legislation that there needs to be transparency and accountability for parents. Which at the moment there is or there isn't? Well, the thing is that at the moment it's contained in Department of Education policy rather than in the law.
Okay. Oh, so it's more of a policy, not a law.
Okay. So the policies at the moment, there's a policy that's sort of like the teaching of controversial issues in schools. And it says if you're teaching controversial issues in a school, you need to let the parents know, you need to give them the opportunity to opt out. If you're teaching sex ed, same type of thing. But what happens with programs like Safe Schools is they say, oh, well, no, this isn't controversial. This isn't sex ed. This is anti-bullying. Right? And so we don't need the parents' consent because this is anti-bullying, or, this is trying to challenge gender roles so that we don't have domestic violence. So this is about a safety.
Okay. And that's how they're trying to get around that?
That's how you get around the requirement in the policies that
But whose job is it then to be able to say to them, no, that's bull, it is sex ed, you're not allowed to teach that within schools? Whose job is it to say that and to enforce the law? To make sure that they don't come up with these kind of loopholes? Well,
so this is where the Department of Education needs to step in, because and there needs to be consequences, right? And so when it's governmental policy, when it's department policy, it's not the same type of consequences. So what Latham's trying to do is actually go, okay, well, it's in your policy documents. And so if you're serious about enforcing it, let's put it into the legislation, right? You talk about it there, let's put it in the law so that it's actually got some teeth. And of course he's getting resistance, because people who want to push these ideologies, who want to indoctrinate your children in the classroom, they don't want you to know about it. They don't want parents to know about it, right? Because these things are best done in the dark.
Absolutely.
Right? You bring them out into the light. And parents don't want it, right? Overwhelmingly, however sympathetic they are, however
and
in
are
favour...
you speaking on behalf of, are you speaking on behalf of Catholic parents or just parents in general?
Parents in general.
Okay.
So I worked on the marriage campaign. I was the communications director for the Coalition for Marriage.
Yep.
Back when they had the same-sex marriage vote.
Uh-huh.
And what we found is, although polling consistently showed us that people were in favour of same-sex marriage, they also didn't want their kids being taught gender ideology in the classroom, right? They don't want it. And this is, no matter what your view on same-sex marriage, no matter what your view is on, transgenderism and all of those things, when it comes to bringing that into the classroom, to impressionable young children, they're like, we don't want it. And the other thing is that, sorry, I'm going about this one, but the contagion effect. So as they push the gender ideology in the schools, the number of kids who present with gender dysphoria is skyrocketing.
Wow.
The year that Safe Schools was introduced in Victoria, I think there were maybe 6 kids going to the gender clinic annually. 6, and now that number's in its hundreds.
Wow.
There are studies that show, every time that, a positive transgender story appears in the media, there are more children that present as gender dysphoric. There is a contagion effect. It's there's a fashion to it. You can't have 5 or 6 kids 10 years ago, and now in one clinic getting hundreds, more than one a day.
Because it's funny though, because I remember reading one of your articles on this very issue, and in the UK, I saw some stats that when the UK court was judging a law or a bill that was going to get passed, they looked at some of the stats from the gender studies or the gender clinic, and they wanted to know, after these people decide to get it's the blockers, the hormone blockers. They wanted to know, well, when people present and they're having anxiety and they're having depression because they feel like they're the wrong sex, and they start to get puberty sex hormone blockers, and then they go through the therapy, they wanted to know, well, let's have a look at some data to see whether are these people still depressed afterwards, after they're getting the therapy, after they're getting the surgery. And they found that the data was missing because and it was probably because it didn't work in their favour.
So, well, there are two here. There was a case in the UK where a young person who had transitioned and who had been pushed through this process ended up going, actually, this isn't what I wanted and it didn't help me, and so sued the National Health Service and the clinic, I think it was Tavistock, and just said, look, you mistreated me, like in the same. And then, so when the court was trying to investigate all of this, that's right, they had no data, not even on the ages of the children that they were pushing through these therapies. And then I want to say Sweden, but I might be getting the country wrong, and forgive me.
It's one of those Nordic countries. I know, because I was thinking of the same thing about were you going to say something along the lines that there are laws there that if a child wants to transition, they can do it without the knowledge and the consent of the parents?
That's not what I was going to say. But
okay, no. Because I heard in Western Australia there was a law that was going to get passed that allowed children who wanted to transition, even at the age of 13 or 14, they could do it without the consent of the parents.
Well, they're slowly starting to remove those. So it used to be that the family court had to approve, because it was like, it's not even a decision that the parents should make. It should be the family court as well. That's been taken away. And then, slowly you're seeing the rights of the parents even, because... And so now it's a decision for child and doctor. But no, there was the biggest study ever done on surgical treatment and hormone treatment for transgender individuals. Ended up finding that there was no positive mental health or physical health benefits to the transition, and in some cases it increased anxiety. They did this study and then didn't like the conclusion, and so put all the data there and then wrote in the conclusion, well, actually, it has a positive effect in some cases. And then you had people actually going to read it and go, hold on, your conclusion doesn't match the data. So they had to come back out a few months later and correct it and say, well, actually, no, the data ends up showing that there's no positive benefits to it.
Mm-hmm.
But the science has become so ideological that even the people doing the research try and fit it into an ideological push. But what we know now is the biggest study of people who've gone through gender treatment, that there are no positive effects to it. So why are we doing it? Why are we pumping kids full of hormones?
Well, there must be money involved for some stakeholders, I guess. And I guess like with the LGBT movement, I guess they've got a lot to gain from this, because they're getting everybody into this whole gender dysphoria. They're getting everybody feeling the same way.
And it's just, and again, this really does seem like an attack on the church and what we hold.
Yeah. And on the family as well. Like even separating the parents from the children as well.
Exactly. Right.
Trying to make them completely separate individuals. And looking at children as well and saying, okay, you at the age of 10 or 11 or 12, we're going to take your opinion or your statements as though you're a full consenting adult with a fully developed prefrontal cortex, and we're going to just allow you to go through life-changing therapy that can't be reversed in almost all cases. Isn't that like if they end up mutilating their genitalia, what are they going to do?
Absolutely, and long-term effects on fertility.
Yeah.
Like if you start, pumping a teenager full of hormones, they might not ever be able to have kids, right?
Wow.
It's a really horrible thing to do.
Yeah.
But you're right about it being an attack on the family and a separation of the parents from the children. Yep. I have a good priest friend who said once, words I'll never forget.
Yep.
He said, if you want to destroy this society, you attack the priesthood and you attack the family.
And that's what's happening now.
And all of these laws that we're talking about
are attacking those two things, yeah.
The priesthood or the family.
Wow.
And we should probably touch on the confessional seal as well.
Well, let's touch on that. I was going to move to that. If we have time, I don't know, like you do know, I wanted to speak about maybe Tasmania and euthanasia.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, all right, so let's move on to confessional seal.
Confessional seal,
and
sure.
So for people who don't know, what's the confessional seal?
So as Catholics, we have something called the Sacrament of Confession, where you go and you confess your sins in the presence of a priest. You're confessing to God, but the priest is there sitting in the person of Christ to hear your confession and to give you absolution for your sins. And so the seal of confession is something that says that the priest, under no circumstances, even at risk of his own life, can ever divulge what he's learnt in confession to anyone.
Yeah.
Right?
And there are good reasons for maintaining the sacramental seal.
Absolutely. Well, if a priest could discuss your sins outside of the confession, would you go?
No.
No.
Yeah. So it protects the integrity of the confessional. It allows people to realise that it's actually something that's between them and God, and and the priest is bound to it. And there are even saints within the church, even in Mexico, that under pain of torture and death did not reveal the sins that were given in the confessional to people within the government, like during the whole, I don't know, the Cristero Wars and things like that. I was reading up a lot on that when I was reading up on the confessional seal. Yes. What's the attack right now that's being put on the confessional seal? And who's doing it?
So, we wind back a few years to the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child abuse, right? Horrible, obviously a horrible part of the history of the church and other institutions as well.
Absolutely.
Children, weren't protected. There was cover-up of the crimes, everything like that. So this 5-year-long Royal Commission investigated aspects of institutions that contributed to the abuse of children.
Okay.
Part of their focus was the confession. It was confession and the seal of confession. And I think that it's probably because it's so peculiarly Catholic, and to those who are outside of the church, how do you explain confession? How do you explain the benefit of it? They just see it as how they see it in the movies, right? This really, dark place, often in, very shades of red or purple or something that's all a little bit creepy. And so characterised it as this place where people would go essentially to hide their abuse. So that's where, that's where they go.
Or hide their crimes.
Hide their crimes, right? You go, you receive absolution for your crime. And so one of the recommendations of the Royal Commission was that legal protections for the seal of confession should be removed, because up until that time, most laws in Australia would say, for giving evidence, you don't have to divulge something that you learned in confession. For mandatory reporting, you don't have to divulge something that you learned in confession.
Yep.
And so the Royal Commission said, actually, we should take those exemptions away and force priests to divulge what they learned about abuse in confession. I always, I have to smile a little bit at people who think that confession is a place where you go to hide. Confession is the one place you go to own up, right?
That's right, yeah.
That's the place where I go to face face my sins, to own up to them, to be transparent about them.
Yeah.
If you wanted to hide your sin, you wouldn't walk into a confessional. You'd go to the pub. I don't know, right? It's the last place you would go.
Yeah.
But I think for people who don't have an experience of the sacrament or an affection for the sacrament, even amongst Catholics. It's hard to understand that actually it's really a place of light rather than a place of darkness and secrecy.
Okay.
I want everyone to rediscover the sacrament of confession anyway.
Yeah.
So that's confession. That's the I guess the mistaken idea of what it is.
Yep.
So governments just went in and started implementing the recommendations of the Royal Commission, including taking away legal protections.
Which they don't always have to do they? Because I noticed that they didn't do that. I know this is a bit of a tangent, but I noticed that the government isn't bound by the Royal Commission to implement these recommendations, but they went and did that anyway.
Absolutely. So what the government does is give a response and say, okay, these ones we're going to do, these ones we're going to consider, these ones we're going to reject. And there was something like, there were hundreds of recommendations of the Royal Commission. I know that South Australia, the very first Royal Commission recommendation that they implemented was removing protections for the seal.
Wow.
And so now every state and territory in Australia has removed protections for the seal except Western Australia and New South Wales. So we're the last two left.
Every state?
Yep.
So it's almost illegal to be a priest in these states?
Well...
Sort of.
You're still allowed to be a priest, but
but you can definitely commit criminal acts by being a priest. And fulfilling your function as a priest.
Absolutely, and even if you don't ever hear about abuse in a confessional, there's still some risks. So we'll go back to Victoria for a second. So Melbourne City Council at one point said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to write to every church in sort of the Melbourne City municipality, and we're going to ask them, are you going to obey the mandatory reporting law?
Yep.
And if they got back a no, or if they got back silence...
They'll report them?
Oh, no, they were going to put a sign on public land outside the church saying this place isn't safe for children.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's not even about waiting for abuse to be... For abuse to be confessed. This is trying to punish the church even for saying that they're going to stick to it.
Wow.
Another one is the same day in the Australian Capital Territory, in the ACT, the same day that the confessional seal laws passed, they changed the education regulations. And so they said, if you're a non-government school, so if you're a Catholic school, you have to demonstrate compliance with the Royal Commission recommendations in order for your registration to be renewed.
Wow.
So... in theory, you have a school that's going up for registration renewal and they say, well, do you take the kids to confession during school hours?
What? I had no idea.
Yeah, same day. The same day they changed the confessional seal laws, they changed the education regulations.
So then what's going to happen then? Because they can't lie about that within the registration, they're going to have to tell them,
They're going to have to tell them.
Yeah.
And so, look, the fight hasn't come yet, but the next Catholic school that goes up for registration, you don't know what the regulator's going to do. Maybe they'll just let it slide and they're not going to have a fight with them.
Yep.
But maybe they're going to have a fight.
Okay.
And maybe we're going to have to go back to, we'll close the school.
Yep.
So that's everywhere. Like I said, the last two states are Western Australia and New South Wales. In Western Australia, they had a parliamentary inquiry. I have to give a real big plug to Archbishop Timothy Costello, who was an absolute warrior, who stood up so strongly for the seal. Not only did he engage with government, but also used it as a teaching opportunity for his flock. And the committee actually came back and said, we recommend that the law doesn't change and that the seal remains protected. Wow. How's that, right? Wow. A parliamentary committee comes back and recommends.
A very small win.
A very, very small win. But you know what?
But it does send a message.
Absolutely, and such a delightful win.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the government said, we don't care what the committee says, we're going to push ahead anyway. But to have him stand up and stand up, with such courage and with such clarity, and for it to have an effect at the committee was just wonderful. But they'll have the fight there.
Okay.
And then New South Wales will probably end up being the last.
Now, is it on our doorstep?
Well, it's funny because every time they spoke, they asked the New South Wales government, what's your approach to confessional seal? They said, we want a nationally consistent approach. So they'll be put under a lot of pressure to change it. Yep. But dare I say, after the abortion fight in New South Wales, I think that the government, all of the MPs actually, all sides, are aware that the church in New South Wales, the church in Sydney, will fight.
Yep.
It will fight unjust legislation, and it will fight the confessional seal. And we also have, the great benefit of such strong Eastern Catholic communities here. The Orthodox community is really committed to confession as well.
Yep.
And so you start to get this really strong contingent, which is great.
And on that note, just for our audience who helped in some way or another with the abortion campaign, our message did not go unheard, did it? Or we still, these are the consequences. These are the good fruits of the hard work that was done even back then. That at least the MPs know that the church in New South Wales or the church in Sydney, we fight.
Absolutely. Yeah. I can guarantee you the only reason that confessional seal hasn't been put on the table in New South Wales is because of how hard everyone fought in abortion. And so that's such good news to hear, and that's actually that's inspired me, because a lot of the time, we feel like, what was the point? We feel like we're in a defeatist position. We did what we could, and even then they didn't listen. But it's so inspiring to hear that the MPs are actually. Oh, they know.
It's either not that they're scared, but that they know that we'll put up a fight.
They know we'll put up a fight, and so they know that if they want to do this, it's going to cost them
time and
lots and lots of time, lots and lots of media. They're not going to be able to just slip it through. And so if I can say to anyone who was discouraged after the abortion campaign and the loss of that, and it was awful, and a lot of tears were cried. The only reason I think we don't have confessional seal laws, we don't have euthanasia on the table at the moment, and even probably the conversion therapy laws, is because they know that you stand up and you fight, and they know that it's going to be a battle.
Wow.
And we're stronger now, right? We're in a much better position in terms of campaigning. Part of my job is to assist in sort of how we run a campaign and do all of things like that. We're in a much better position.
Very good.
The churches are united, so we work very, very closely with a number of other faith groups. The Sydney Anglicans are wonderful, the Greek Orthodox, obviously the Eastern Catholic churches, but even some of the others, the Islamic community, we work closely with them as well. Because we understand, particularly when it comes to these type of laws, that it is religion that's under attack. It's faith that's under attack. Yes, I think they disproportionately target the Catholic Church, but we are, in a sense, all in this together. And so
that's true.
We work very, very closely together. And so the fruits of even of our losses mean that we're stronger for the next fight. So, and we'll win. We're gonna start winning some.
Well, hopefully.
Yeah, please God.
Yeah, and I hope we get some ministers that are as passionate as Barnaby Joyce, and some of them were when they came and they spoke at the abortion rally, to be on our side for the sacramental seal. I don't know whether they're going to be as passionate with regards to the sacramental seal, but it does have such very deep and very sinister implications.
I'll say two things about that. One is that in terms of having politicians be passionate about it, I think the first thing is that we need to be passionate about it. I don't want to read another article or hear another story that begins with, confession is a long abandoned practice. If you want to know the best way to protect the seal of confession, go to confession. Right? Absolutely. It's a lot more difficult for them to take away protections for something that Catholics are engaged in on a regular basis. So you want to protect confession? Yes, there will be a time to protest and to fight and to write letters and to do all of that, but the thing that you can do right now is show up at... Go to confession. Go to confession. That's the way to protect it.
Great advice.
But in terms of the sinister applications, one of the things that I think makes this law different from so many others is that a priest will have no ability to protect himself against a false accusation, right?
Yeah.
So say, Father Michael, you hear my confession, and I go to the police and say, well, I went to confession to Father Michael and I told him A, B, C, D, E, and he didn't report it.
Yep.
The police come and knock on your door. Did you hear her confession? You're not even allowed to disclose if you heard my confession.
Yeah.
That breaks the seal. You can't say, oh yes, she did. I did hear her confession, but she didn't say that. That breaks the seal.
That does break the seal.
Yeah. So you can't go out there and go, oh well, she didn't confess murder and she didn't confess this.
Okay.
You can't rattle off the sins that someone didn't confess.
Okay.
That breaks the seal. You can't even say that I came to you.
Okay.
I don't even have to come to Father Michael for confession. I can just walk into a police station and say, he heard my confession and he didn't report it. How do you defend yourself?
Wow.
How do you defend yourself against a false accusation?
Wow.
You have no ability. And this, I think, is the first ever creation of a law against which the accused is in a position where they cannot provide a defence.
At all, yeah.
At all. And that's really scary.
And that's an accusation that can incriminate a person without any evidence.
Without any evidence.
Yeah, as well.
Yeah, because what's the evidence?
I wonder how all the priests feel about this in those states, or even in New South Wales if it's going to get passed.
It's
like, what's the talk around the town, or what's the talk around we're just going to go to jail?
Yeah, there's some of that, and I remember talking to a really good priest friend of mine, and I was saying to him, like, this fight I'm really scared about, because if we lose it, it's the priests who suffer the consequences. That's right. Like, it's kind of like
it's not us. Yeah.
Yeah, like I'm the one tasked with maybe having the political fight.
Yeah.
But then, if I lose the fight, you're the one who bears the consequences.
That's
and he
right,
said, I'm not going to remember the saint. This is terrible. I'll remember like 5 minutes later. But there was a saint who said, like, don't try too hard to stop me from being fed to the lions, because maybe that's my calling, and maybe the Lord is asking me to be fed to the lions. Okay. Might be Ignatius of Antioch. Yeah.
Okay. Because he got fed to the lions.
Yeah. And he said, maybe don't try too hard to stop me being fed to the lions.
Because maybe that's his.
Maybe that's what I'm supposed to do. Yeah. And this priest was saying, maybe it will be good for the church in Australia if there are priests in prison because they won't break the seal of confession.
Yeah.
Like, maybe that's actually what we need, and maybe I'm going to need to sit in a jail cell for protecting the seal, and that is actually will be a witness, and it will bear fruit for Australia. So that's what I'm hearing. I mean, look, our priests are good, and and they are definitely willing to lay down their lives for this. Even priests who disagree on any number of other issues, priests from any side of the, dare I say, the ideological spectrum, agree on the sacramental seal. Okay. But again, if that's their task and that's what they're willing to do, what are we willing to do to protect the sacrament of confession, right? This isn't a one-way street. We need to make sacrifices as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The last fight that we've got on our hands, is euthanasia. So what's going on there?
Well, it's been operative in Victoria, obviously. It'll kick in Western Australia this year. So
laws have passed in Victoria now?
Laws have passed in Victoria.
Assisted suicide.
Euthanasia.
Okay.
We don't know yet how many people have died in this year, but it was already up to about 150, I think, last year.
And do you know about any of the intricate details with regards to the Victoria law as to the reasons that a person gives for wanting to be euthanised? Like, can it be for any reason? Can it? Do they have to have a grave illness?
So Victorian law, it's terminal illness, 6 month prognosis.
Yep.
The WA law that's passed that hasn't yet started, I think, is 12 months.
Okay.
But still focused on terminal illness.
Yep.
In other parts of the country, Queensland, they're expecting a bill sort of May of this year. Tasmania's had a bill, and it's gone through one House of Parliament. It's headed into the next, and it looks like it'll pass, possibly with some amendments, but it's going to pass.
Wow.
The way that bill started was just extraordinary in terms of its scope. that it was so broad that you didn't even need a terminal illness, that technically, you know, having diabetes or something like that would have qualified you. And even actually it started out somebody with an injury, an incurable injury, so people with paralysis. So they've had to get support, they've had to narrow it down and narrow the scope down.
Okay.
But that's what happens with these euthanasia laws, right?
Yeah.
So they come in, a very narrow scope, and then almost immediately they start trying to expand it to more categories of people.
Yeah.
And it's actually the hardest fight that we have, because so many of our own people aren't on side with it.
Yep.
So many Catholics, even Catholics in the pews, look at it and go, well, if it's someone and it's their choice, and they don't want to suffer, then I'm not going to stand in the way. And so many people have had an experience of a loved one who's died in
a very painful or
very
grave
painful
situation. Yeah.
But the thing is that it doesn't have to be like that. You know, Australian palliative care, I think, is second best in the world. But there's just not enough funding put into it. There's not enough funding put into palliative care. We've had the Aged Care Royal Commission, the Disability Royal Commission. So we're hearing all of these stories about, you know, the terrible treatment of our elderly in aged care homes, the terrible treatment of those with disabilities. And then all of a sudden you put euthanasia on the table and you start to say, oh, well, no, that's a choice. Well, no, choice means you have aged care that is, you know, that is funded well and where people aren't neglected or abused. You have disability care in the same way. And then, you can start talking about choices, but euthanasia isn't a choice. But yeah, it's a hard fight.
It's more of a lack of choices.
Lack of choices, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Philip Nitschke, who's the guy who, you know, one of the main euthanasia advocates in Australia, he made a comment along the lines of, well, in the Gold Coast, we get a lot of inquiries because the Royal Commission exposed 2 of the aged care homes in there as being particularly bad, and people are like, I would rather die than go into aged care. Yeah. That's not a choice, right? I would rather die than do that. Isn't a choice. It's not, and it's not the dignity that people.
That's right.
That people should have.
It's fitting that you mentioned. It's fitting that you mentioned that, because there is going to be a Royal Commission. The results of the Royal Commission into aged care. That's come out, or that's going to be coming out. Yeah,
Friday, 26th of February. So
yeah, looking at the results from the Royal Commission into aged care, because there's been a lot of negligence. Going on in there, and this has probably led to people who have been mistreated within aged care and nursing facilities, who have decided it is better probably to kill myself or to die rather than to be put under these put in this situation, under these like grueling circumstances.
Absolutely, you know, and horrendous stories that came out of the Disability Royal Commission, where people with disabilities were just
abused,
abused, but also just not given proper medical treatment. That's because they say, they attribute any medical issue they're having to their disability. So we need to do better at caring for our elderly, for our disabled, for our terminally ill. We need to fund palliative care better so that people aren't left dying in pain and things like that.
Absolutely. And Bishop Porteous was pretty vocal about it in Tasmania, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He wrote a letter, and
he's an absolute warrior, right? I mean, they throw everything at him down there.
Absolutely. He's had a fight on his hands down there.
And he stands up every time. I always say that Tasmania needed an exorcist down there, and thank God for him.
Definitely.
Yeah,
because that's not even a pun. Like, he's an exorcist. Yeah. And so he was definitely sent to Tasmania for the right reasons.
Absolutely.
So what's the situation going on down there at the moment? Have they passed the euthanasia laws?
So it's been through one of the Houses of Parliament.
Okay. They're still waiting for the next?
Yeah, there was the University of Tasmania review into it that proposed some recommendations. One of the big issues actually is about whether or not institutions should have the right to object. So should a Catholic hospital be able to say, no, we don't want it on our premises? And if they do say we don't want it on our premises, what's their responsibility in having to transfer a patient or refer a patient to somewhere that does have it? And so trying, in the same way that our abortion laws often force the doctor's hands, and they say that, if you're a doctor who objects, you still have to refer on, Tasmania want to do that for Catholic doctors, Catholic institutions as well. Okay.
And so the current situation at the moment is that it's been through one of their houses, but we don't know where with regards to...
Well, it's set for debate.
It's set for debate.
Yeah.
And where does New South Wales stand on euthanasia at the moment?
So at the moment, it's not currently on the table. Alex Greenwich, who was the one who orchestrated the abortion bill, has sort of said, well, he's going to do basically the same thing with euthanasia.
Wow.
And he's going to pop a euthanasia bill out this year.
Yeah.
He's
got a bit of a chip on his shoulder, doesn't he?
He does have a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. We need to pray for him.
Absolutely.
But after the abortion campaign, I don't know if you remember, the Premier said two things. One, she said there'll be no more conscience votes on social issues during this term of Parliament, which takes us to 2023.
Yeah.
And I
think she got worn out from all of them.
Yeah, good. Yeah. See, people who fought for abortion, you did a good thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Fought the abortion campaign, not fought for abortion. You know what I mean?
I hope she had a couple of uncomfortable sleepless nights from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of them. And the other thing she said is MPs aren't allowed to work on cross-party working groups on social issues.
Okay.
Like euthanasia.
Wow.
So if Greenwich does this,
and
it comes on and tries to put it on for a vote, then it's going to be a test of the Premier, really, and of her authority. And
on her consistency
her consistency and her willingness to sort of...
And I wonder how narrow or how broad he's going to define the terms when he goes and puts it on the table.
Who knows? Often with euthanasia...
They start like that and then they go like,
to make it look like they're giving you concessions, and then as soon as it goes through the door, they go back like that.
Okay.
Right?
But are they... So for now, it's terminally ill patients?
For now.
But it could be anything from mental illness, and there could be no age restrictions. It could be almost anyone for any reason.
Going forward?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, if we follow the paths of other countries.
Absolutely, And we have followed the paths of other countries with regards to other laws as well. And often
a lot quicker. Yeah. So what might take, another country 10 years to get there, Australia will get there, a lot quicker. So...
Yep.
Lots to do, lots...
yeah, definitely.
Lots to fight. That's why,
Absolutely. Yeah. So, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
It's been great. We're definitely gonna have you again because the fight is still on our doorstep, and I'm sure there's going to be another issue or another fight on our hands. We need to know how these bills are going, and we need to find ways to... Because you were saying also that, like with the archdiocese, we have a lot of people that are on side. You have a lot of data from people that have signed up in and through the marriage campaigns, so that there are ways to get information out to not to our fan base, but to Catholics, to give them the equipment and the tools to know how to respond to MPs, how to put pressure. Would you like to talk, just to finish off with a little bit on that before we end up?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So for anyone who hasn't done it yet, the Catholic Archdiocese of Sydney website, if you log on, there's a little pop-up that comes up that says sign up for updates from the Archbishop. I encourage you to do that because whenever there's a call to action, that's where you're going to hear it from first. Again, I'm not trying to give a shameless plug, but the Catholic Weekly will always have information on stuff like this. Archdiocese of Sydney on social media, whichever faith community you're from. Like I said, the faith communities collaborate very well on this. So if you're a Maronite, be following Maronites in Australia, also be following Bishop Tarabay, the Australian Christian Lobby. Like all of the pages, and we'll keep you informed.
Awesome. Thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure. Hopefully we'll have you back on again.
I'd love to.
Awesome. That was another episode of Couch Catechism. I'm your host, Michael Obeid from Voracious Media. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Stay strong, keep the faith, and we'll see you again next week.
My name is Father Damon Cypher. I'm a member of the Priestly Fraternity of St. Peter, which is the Latin Mass order. Our order has been ministering to the faithful in Western Sydney for about 20 years now. But we think it's time for us to find our own place, to be able to build our own church. So we're really encouraging people to make donations, perhaps even dedicated to monthly donations, so that we can afford to take on perhaps a mortgage for this great endeavour. So we would like to, in the long term, build a traditional church for the celebration of the traditional liturgy in the Latin Rite. We would encourage you to think about this, to pray about this, and see if God is calling you to commit to helping us with this great endeavour to build a new church for Western Sydney.